Imagine yourself walking into a store where every item has a clear and simple price tag. No confusing tax slabs and no complicated tax math. This is what exactly the proposed GST reforms aim to achieve. Hello and welcome to Drishti IAS, and in this video we will decode what these proposed reforms would mean for the common man as well as for the government. So our Prime Minister in his Independence Day speech this year, he announced a Diwali gift from the center. This Diwali gift is going to contain reforms in the GST tax structure, in the existing tax slab structure of the GST. This will be a part of the next generation GST reforms. So what is GST and why was it introduced in the first place? GST was introduced to unify the fragmented and complicated indirect tax structure that we had in the country. We wanted to unify everything and save ourselves from the cascading effect of multiple indirect taxes. But what was the problem with the existing structure? That it often got difficult to understand which product was fall into which tax slab because there were so many tax slabs. And this confusion was taken advantage of by some shopkeepers and business owners. Because all of us would have been in this situation where we go to a shop and we buy a certain product, and the shopkeeper tells us that if we want an authentic bill, there will be a certain amount of GST that we'll have to pay that's levied on the product. And if we want to save ourselves from the GST, then we can simply do away with the bill. This way, we feel that we are saving ourselves, we are saving our money, we're not paying the tax. But who is actually benefiting? It is that shopkeeper or the business owner. Because now that person will not have to show that transaction in his book of records, and the entire money will go into his or her pocket. So this is what was happening. Some sort of a tax evasion was happening, and GST was not functioning as per its goal because of these confusing tax slab structures that we had. So there are some proposals to reform the tax slabs of GST. For that, we must first understand what are the current tax slabs of GST. So currently we have four main tax slabs: 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. There are some concessional slabs also like 0.25% for diamonds and semi-precious stones and 3% for jewelry and other precious metals. Apart from this, the four main tax slabs are 5, 12, 18 and 28, and then there is a compensation cess also. Cess is a tax that is paid for a specific purpose. What is the specific purpose here? It is compensation. Compensation for whom? Compensation for the states who would have lost any revenue because of the implementation of GST. Any revenue loss that the states would have incurred because of the implementation of GST had to be compensated by the union government. For this, a compensation cess was being levied on goods. So this was the existing tax structure, and the problem was that we found it difficult as to categorize this which product should go under which tax slab, because there are so many tax slabs. And over and above, there was also a compensation cess, like a tax that we had to pay for additional purposes also. So our goods were not cheaper and GST was not serving its purpose. Then what is the proposal? The proposal is to have only two main tax slabs of 5% and 18%, which means that we have completely eliminated 12% and 28%. 99% of the goods that earlier used to fall under 12% will now move to 5%, and roughly 90% of the goods that used to fall under 28% will now move to 18%. So 5% will now have our essential items and 18% will have most of the other items plus some luxury goods. Some luxury goods and not super luxury goods. And apart from these two main slabs, we will have a concessional slab of less than 1%, which will have the items which earlier used to fall under the 0.25% and 3% category. And then we will have a sin slab of 40%, which will have only 5 to 7 items like gutka or tobacco. But this will be for all the sin goods. So we will have less than 1%, 40%, and then only two main slabs of 5% and 18%. This is being done to reform the existing tax structure to make it simpler and easier for the common man to understand and function. So what will this mean for you? What will this mean for the common man? First and foremost, a simpler tax structure. simpler tax structure because now we have only two main tax slabs. We do not have so many different complicated tax slabs. There's a simpler tax structure. Most importantly, the goods will become cheaper because if you notice, earlier all the goods that used to fall under 12% category have moved to the 5% category. Lesser GST is being applied, and 28% category has moved to an 18% category. 28% category had your goods like AC, fridge, other electronics. They will now be moved to the 18% category. You will get it at cheaper rates. And all the other essential items also like soap, toothpaste, or your daily other essentials, they will now move to 5% tax slab. So naturally the goods will become cheaper and the tax structure will become simpler. And we are also expecting to curb the tax evasion that earlier used to happen because of having a complicated tax structure. Now shopkeepers will not have that leverage. They will not have that encouragement or motivation to to do away with these different sorts of bills because now we have a very simple tax structure. They cannot really play with the different products and place them under different categories at their own will. They will all be defined properly and they can be categorized as per their own slabs. So we are expecting that the tax evasion should also go down. But for the general public, this will come in as a good news because the goods will now become cheaper and our tax will become simpler. And what will this mean for the government? So there will be two types of implications, short-term implication and long-term implication. In the short term, there is definitely going to be some revenue loss because the government is now levying lesser taxes. So lesser money is going to come into the government's funds or government's kitty, but the general public is going to benefit from it. So short term, definitely some revenue loss. But in the long term, what is this increasing? This is increasing the consumption behavior of the common man. People are now going to consume more, produce more, demand is going to increase. So the domestic consumption pattern is going to change and the consumption is going to increase. So in the long run, the revenue loss that's going to happen in the short run will be compensated for. So that is the vision that the government has. The vision is to increase the consumption behavior in general public. And this is what we achieve with these tax reforms. But what the real issue right now is that these are proposed reforms. Who has proposed it? The center has proposed it. And how will this be implemented? This will be implemented when the GST Council approves of it. Quickly recall which article of the Constitution deals with GST Council. It is Article 279A. And this GST Council has members from both the center and the states. So both of them have to be in agreement for any motion to be passed. Why? Because center has 1/3 of the votes and states combined, they have 2/3 of the votes. And for any proposal to be passed, we need a 75% majority in the GST Council, which cannot be achieved by the center alone because center only has 1/3 of the votes. We also need the states to agree with the center. That is the real issue here, that the center has proposed, but now this has gone to the group of ministers of the GST Council and everybody has to come in agreement. The states have to come in agreement. Only then this will be passed. Only then these proposed reforms will become a reality. But for the common man, it's a good thing because our goods are becoming cheaper. So it is a promising thing, but we will have to see what happens. What is the GST Council going to decide on that? That was all for today's video. Now let us practice a question for prelims. One of the major reasons behind the center's proposal to reduce the number of GST slabs is to ensure that all luxury goods are completely exempted from tax, to simplify the tax structure, reduce evasion and boost consumption, to replace GST with state-level indirect taxes, or to introduce additional cess on goods and services. So please provide your answers in the comment section and we will meet in the next video.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.